Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. My name is Angela, and I'd like to welcome you to today's session, Driving Growth with Insights-Driven Decisions at Scale, presented by Tim Burge. A couple of points before we begin. The webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be made available to you after the webinar. You can ask questions during and also at the end of the session by sending them through the questions widget. Now, our webinar platform has a few functions, which I'm just quickly going to walk you through. Number one shows you where you can send your questions, so that's the questions widget. Number two is where you can, of course, see the slides. And number three are a group of widgets. Now, these widgets offer you the chance to interact with fellow webinar attendees through the group chat or to interact with the platform and the content. So please just click on the icons and have a look at what happens. The platform is designed for you to get everything you can out of our time together, so please just experiment and have a little bit of fun. Right, without further ado, let me introduce you to Tim, who is Senior Director at Market Logic. For over 15 years, Tim has been helping people solve real-world business problems through the use of advanced marketing technologies. Focusing on bridging the gap between business and technology, Tim has worked in both the technology and the agency worlds. So Tim, over to you.
Thank you very much, Angela. So 15 years sounds like an awful long time, doesn't it? But I guess I've been having fun for that time. So yeah, hi everyone. And I'd just like to talk today about this idea of driving growth with insight-driven decisions at scale. And I'm going to spend, I guess, 2 parts on the presentation today. So we'll spend the first half talking about really the problem space here and why this can be challenging for organizations to adopt this kind of method. And then we'll spend the second half of the presentation talking about some real world examples of how people are using this, in a practical way and how they're getting value out of these kind of decisions. So I'm just going to set the scene here by thinking about what do we mean by decisions and what is decision making all about, right? And I think, as adults, we make lots of decisions every day. And there's some research out there that says that just as an adult, we can make up to 35,000 decisions a day. And that's a lot, right? And if you assume that the average person sleeps for 7 hours a day and we don't make many decisions while we're asleep, that's still about 2,000 decisions an hour. And so there's a lot of complexity in the world. And, there's a lot of those decisions that we make, some of them are just very kind of gut feel driven. What should I do today? What should I wear? Do I need to drink coffee? What kind of coffee should I order? Some of those questions are, kind of more business related. I mean, you probably made a question. You made a decision to attend this webinar, maybe some time ago. And hopefully, again, you made the decision that it would be worthwhile listening to me talk about this today. And a lot of those are subconscious. And I'm pretty sure that you subconsciously made a decision to believe me or not when I put that number up on the screen there. So a lot of these decisions are being made kind of, without really knowing that we make them. But some decisions that we make are really driven by a combination maybe of data and intuition or gut feel. Just take the example of this guy sitting on the mountainside here looking at the sunset above the cloud level. He probably made lots of decisions to get where he needs to be. One of the decisions he'll need to make at some point is how much longer can he sit there watching the sunset before, so that he can still get down off the mountain before it gets dark. And a decision like that is really based on a number of factors. There's data that you need to make that decision. So, what time does the sun go down? How quickly does it get dark after the sun goes down? There's also some personal experience involved in that decision because only he really knows how quickly he can walk down there or how long the journey up was. And so some of these decisions we make are more complicated and are driven by data. And I think if we think about the kind of decisions we need to make in the workplace and at work, really those decisions need to be driven by data in order for us to come to the right conclusions and make the right decisions about what we're trying to do. And I think particularly as your level of responsibility grows within an organization, then really so does the need to make correct decisions because there's possibly a lot more riding on it than there was previously. And really that means that we need to have access to the data or the knowledge or the insights to be able to make those decisions. And we can't rely on gut feel in those kind of environments. Now, on the surface, that sounds pretty straightforward, right? I mean, there's lots of knowledge out there. And if you look at this curve here, this is known as the Buckminster-Fuller knowledge doubling curve, and it really describes how much knowledge we have and how quickly that knowledge is building, right? And the basis behind this is that if you wind the clock back a long way, between 1400 and 1900 there, the amount of human knowledge doubled about once every 500 years. But as we kind of wind the clock forward and get closer to the present time, you can see that the amount of knowledge available is doubling much more quickly. So, 50 years in the first part of the 20th century, 20 years, towards the end of it, once every 10 years. And it was written recently in 2017, it was estimated that the amount of human knowledge doubles every 13 months, right? And kind of taking that to the extreme, there's a prediction by IBM, and IBM basically said that given that the Internet of Things and kind of the connected everything of the Internet age, we would reach a point not too far from now where the amount of human knowledge in existence would double every 12 hours, right? And that's an amazing fact. And we're not just talking about, human knowledge is not just about building fusion reactors and things. It's about, what do we know about customer behavior and what has the pandemic done to change consumers' attitude towards sustainability? What is the recent climate change? How has that driven shopping attitudes? So this is all knowledge about everything. And, the challenge that this brings is that, while on the surface you would think that actually having more knowledge available would make it easier to make decisions, actually we quite often find that the inverse is true there. In fact, what we see in most industries here is that as available knowledge increases and as the rate of change increases, not just the rate of change of that knowledge, but the rate of change of the industries that we're working in and the rate of change of consumer behavior, actually our ability to make decisions actually reduces because typically we're overwhelmed by the amount of knowledge available to make that decision. And it's almost impossible for humans to process that sheer volume of knowledge. Now, whether that's the knowledge inside your own organization that you've collected through research or through external intelligence, competitive intelligence, it's still an enormous amount of knowledge that you need to have access to in order to make those decisions effectively. And the more this goes on, the harder and harder it is to make those decisions. And really what that results in is, when you are overwhelmed and swamped by the amount of knowledge, people have a tendency to resort to maybe, cherry picking, is that I'll choose some information or I'll choose some knowledge that supports my opinion. So you're not really using your available knowledge base. You're, selectively choosing something to effectively prove yourself right, which is not really the correct basis for making decisions. But the other thing we see as well is that the rate of change also affects how quickly do we need to make these decisions, and how many of those decisions do we need to make in order to remain competitive in the market or to keep up with consumer trends. And that also leads to another thing, which is decision fatigue. We get tired of making those decisions, which also makes it harder to find what we need, harder to get to make the right decisions based on the right data. So if we want to be on the right side of that rate of change curve there and get our ability to decide heading in the right direction there, we really have to adopt a new way of thinking about how we go about managing knowledge and how we give people access to knowledge. Okay, so the consequences of not getting it right are quite obvious. I think there's lots of research out there. The Harvard Business School says, for instance, that for every 30,000 new products that are typically introduced every year, over 95% of those fail. Not all of that is going to be due to bad decisions, but some of that is going to be caused by bad decisions or the lack of data to support decisions or the wrong decisions being made because people were looking at the wrong knowledge or they interpreted the knowledge in the wrong way. And the economic cost of that, again, some research here from IBM, they estimate that businesses lose approximately $3.1 trillion a year due to poor data and poor decisions. And the context of that is that's the same amount of money as the GDP of the Netherlands. So there's an enormous amount at stake here if we don't get this right and we don't use that knowledge effectively. And of course, other side effects of that too is that I think we've all seen stories about how quickly a brand can be damaged by a poor decision or something happening in the marketplace which they didn't adapt to or didn't respond to fast or quickly enough. And reputational damage to a brand can happen instantly, and it can take a long time to recover from. So it's clearly not somewhere you want to be. And also missed opportunities. Maybe it's not a negative impact or reputational damage, but if it's something that your competitors did that you didn't because you didn't spot that opportunity or you didn't see that knowledge in your knowledge repository, then it's a missed opportunity, lack of growth, lost revenue. And I think we all understand what the price of making the wrong decision is. But so we need some way of thinking about how we can solve this problem of getting the using that knowledge effectively. Now, just as a sort of an interesting side here, this is a problem that's existed for a long, long time, right? And the idea of a knowledge economy or an insights team has existed right back to the ancient Greeks. So kind of as early as 800 BC. Now, wasn't called an insights team in those days. The job title for someone there in those days was called either a Pythia or a Pythia, and I'm not really sure how to pronounce that because my ancient Greek is not that great. And of course, if you Google it, you get both of those pronunciations. So I'm really not sure which one is the right one. So I'm going to go with Pythia for the purposes of today. But the purpose of that person, they were the person you went to ask for knowledge, or if you needed a complicated decision made, you went to the oracle and you asked the oracle a question and the oracle gave you advice. And it was typically a very kind of personal relationship because it was usually kings or rulers or senior people who sought advice from the Pythia and wanted to know what decision to make. Now, if we wind that forward into the modern world, that role, of course, still exists today, except we now call that the insights team instead of the oracle or the Pythia. And that insights team no longer has to just serve the kings and the rulers of a company. There are a lot more stakeholders involved in decision making now than there were back in the ancient Greece. So it's an entirely different dynamic. Now we have a team instead of a person servicing potentially a large group of people. And if we think about the challenge there, this is a real-world example from a large CPG client in the US. Their challenge is how do you deliver insight or knowledge to the business when you have a team of 35 people that serve 40 brands with a 1 to 10 expert to stakeholder ratio. So that's 350 people that they have to help make decisions and serve insight and intelligence to. So if we look at that, that ratio of 1 to 10, actually, if you're a branded house like that, if you're L'Oreal, we're talking about the democratization of insights recently, and that's their challenge. How can they get all of their stakeholders to have access to this knowledge base? But if you're a house of brands where we're talking about a kind of company that has multiple brands there, then the ratio is often much higher than that. So it can be as high as 1 to 100 in those kind of situations where you have a lot of stakeholders to service. Those stakeholders are making lots of decisions in this complex, very rapidly changing world. So it's, how do we give people access to that knowledge in a way that makes it easy for them to make decisions? So this is, as I said, it's not something new. I mean, since obviously things have moved on a bit since the ancient Greeks, but we are thinking about, we've been thinking about this problem for quite a long time. And typically the first thing that we did when we were trying to solve that problem was we thought about, well, how can we build a knowledge repository to make use of all of that knowledge that we have? And in the days when market research was on someone's laptop or in someone's head or in someone's personal SharePoint folder, the first thing we did was we thought about putting those all together into central stores. So we used SharePoint, Google Drive, or some sort of cloud technology maybe to bring everything together. Typically, what that created was a whole bunch of information silos. So, content was theoretically somewhere where you could find it, but it was still hard to find and people really didn't know where to look. So the kind of logical extension from that was to say, well, now we've got all this information somewhere where we know where it is. We really need to put some sort of search engine on top of that to help people find it and help people get access to that content. And this is where the sort of second generation technologies come into play. And a lot of people are maybe at that stage now where you have some sort of knowledge management platform, you've got some sort of search capability, but you've really got to move on from there, because the challenge of search there is really going back to that graph that we had before with our ability to make decisions declining. Giving people easier access to search does not help solve the problem of this volume of information. In fact, it makes it easier for people to get overwhelmed by information if you're not careful. It also kind of makes it harder for people to make sense of the content that's in the platform there. And there's a really nice story about the Oracle. Apparently, there's one of the kings who'd been asking the Oracle for advice, just like all the kings had been before him. Asked advice to make decisions about what to do in the country. And after a series of really spectacular mishaps, he went back to the Oracle and complained about being misled. And the Oracle replied that actually it was his fault for misinterpreting what she'd said. Right? And that's where we need to get away from, is that how do we help people now not just to find that data, but interpret that data in a way that makes it easy for them to make decisions. And that's really where the third generation piece comes in here. How can we help people to use that information or that knowledge constructively to drive decisions and to make decisions quickly and at scale, because there are more decisions to be made now. And if we look a bit closer about that relationship, this is really about how can that insights team support that business. And if we look at the component pieces of that, and at the end of the day, the business needs to be able to use and apply the knowledge it has to make effective decisions. In order for the business to do that, the insights team needs to be able to engage with the business users and give them the content they need. Right? And we need to have some sort of making sense of the content and curation of the content that goes on to make it easier for those business users to interpret the results. Business users then need a way of collaborating, because typically decisions are not made by an individual or by a single department. It's normally a collaborative effort to make these kind of strategic decisions. And so therefore we need ways to collaborate on all of this knowledge that we have. And that insights team, trying to service a very, very large number of stakeholders, needs some formal way of managing that process at scale. So this is where we need to think about, maybe workflows or process and, and insights as a service, or what service does insights need to provide to its stakeholders. So these are all of the things that we need to think about if we really want to take that body of knowledge that we have and use that effectively within an organization to allow people on the business side to make effective, knowledge-driven decisions and not fall into that trap of cherry picking or just being totally overwhelmed and having decision fatigue. So what we'll do now is we will switch gears a little bit now and talk about how some people are solving some of these problems in the real world. I'm not going to name any clients here, but I'm just going to talk about typically the kind of things people are doing. But these are all real world examples, and people are genuinely doing this within the market logic world. And the first example I've got here is of using and applying information. It's really about how can you get all of the stakeholders or all of the people in an organization involved in that use and application of knowledge. So this particular story here is that this is a retailer. In fact, it was an intern, I believe, in the organization who happened to be in a competitive store, noticed that they were partnering with one of these instant delivery firms, groceries to your door in 15 minutes. And that intern took a photo of that particular ad or promotion in the store, used the technology of market logic to post it as a news post within the application. That went right the way up to the CEO's desk to alert the CEO to the problem. And that resulted in this organization changing strategic direction and partnering with an instant delivery company to remain competitive in that market space. So that's a great example of how you take knowledge that's being generated from anywhere in the organization, how you can take that, use that, and apply that to, in this case, a decision which really changed the direction of the business. Another example of this is how do you take all of that data that you've got, or all the reporting in the organization, and present that as a harmonized view? Because at the end of the day, in order to have effective decisions made based on insights, we have to have a central place to go to for all those insights so that everyone knows where to go and everyone is looking at the same set of knowledge, of truth, of data. So this is about bringing it all together, creating this harmonized view where everyone knows exactly where to go for it and everyone sees the same things. And then before maybe we can apply that knowledge to making decisions, we really need to think about, well, how can we create that consistent view and how can we build libraries of knowledge? So this is really where the curation piece comes in. This particular company has built this insight library for key business areas so that people are all aligned on the decisions they're making. So, standard definitions of things, standard content, standard areas for materials so that everybody knows what you're talking about. Everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet, using the same terminology and things and knows where to go to find that. And that's the role of this symbiotic kind of loop here is to allow the insights team the ability to create that content, curate that content for the business users. And then on top of that curation, obviously, is this idea of sense making. And this is really the king, again, complaining to the oracle that he doesn't understand the advice he's been giving. And that's what sense making is all about. This is giving people the ability to use storytelling to explain complex topics and really bring the why to the story of the what. So a lot of reporting will tell you what happened, but to really understand, why did that happen? This is when you need to consolidate all that knowledge together and tell a story. And people have been using stories as a way of explaining complex problems for a long time, even before the ancient Greeks. And that's still a topic or a process or a method which is still very valid today, is to use that idea of storytelling to encapsulate knowledge and build this strategic repository of knowledge which will help people understand not just what's happening, but why things are happening too. Now, of course, we talked about collaboration. So, as I said, decisions are typically not made with a single person or a single group in a company. There's normally lots of people that are involved and lots of disparate teams. So part of this problem of managing the knowledge asset that you have and allowing people to use it effectively to make decisions is to be able to bring those teams together so that the global teams are working with the local teams, the competitive intelligence guys are talking to the quality teams, mechanistic, in this case, it's about sort of user experience functionality, making sure that everyone is aligned and making decisions based on the same data set, but able to share their experiences and collaborate on that. So it's more than just making sure everybody sees the same thing. It's allowing people to work together to jointly come up with content, create their own stories, create their own news posts like we saw in the first example there, and really work together to make a decision based on this central knowledge repository. And in order to keep all those different groups on side, we have to figure out a way of engaging with them. And there's lots of different stakeholders in a typical organization, particularly if you're in one of these house of brands where you've got a large number of stakeholders that you serve. Each one of those groups has a different set of requirements and needs to see different content. And you've got to keep those people engaged by serving them with content which is relevant and appropriate to their role or their part in that decision-making process. So this is really about how can we reach out, how can we provide those decision makers with the right content so we are expert channels, targeted newsletters, and making sure that we're serving people with what they really need. And then the final two things I've got here are about how can we then maybe package that up as a set of services. Because to do this at scale, we need to figure out, what service do our stakeholders need from us as an insights team, and how can we turn that into a repeatable process that allows us to deliver a quality service to those people, but in a way that meets their expectations. So understanding, what services do you need to deliver, and ultimately, we get to a stage where, at some point, we discover that knowledge that we need doesn't exist, and we have to go and figure out a way of creating that knowledge. So workflow and process is an important part of this. How can we manage the process of conducting new market research, creating new knowledge, particularly in environments which are maybe heavily regulated, where there is compliance and regulation that needs to be followed in order to do that. I mean, this example here from the pharmaceutical industry, very heavily regulated, and compliance groups that need to be kept up to date of what kind of research you're running. It's important to have that as part of this knowledge process too. And a market insights platform needs to be able to manage that process and create that new knowledge for you, as well as allow users access to existing knowledge. So really, just in summary, before we go to questions, I mean, this is very much about giving the right people access to the right content, allowing those people the ability to make insight-based decisions without overwhelming them with the amount of content that's available. So an insights team supporting the business through this idea of sense-making and curation, engaging business users with the right content, allowing business users to collaborate. And it's really only by bringing all those things together that we can really make use of that knowledge repository effectively and get to the stage where we can keep up with that rate of change. We can make properly informed decisions based on the knowledge that we have without being overwhelmed. And therefore we can, not fall into those traps we talked about earlier about kind of loss of reputation, loss of revenue that's associated with not using the data and making decisions based purely on gut feel or cherry picking. So I'd like to open it up for questions now, because there's a lot of content we talked about there. So if there's any questions that we've got, I'll happily take those now. Angela?
Great, Tim. Thank you so much. That was fascinating, and certainly brushed up on my ancient Greek as well while we were at it.
If you can help me with the pronunciation, that would be great.
Not even going to try. If I can remind our audience that you can send us your questions through the Q&A widget, just type away. In the interim, we do have some questions that have come in. So, Tim, to start with, the question is, you talk about collaboration. Can you explain a little more on what that really means?
Yeah, so I think collaboration, so the idea of collaboration here is that in a knowledge management or market insights platform where you're trying to give people the ability to make those insight decision drivens at scale, as I said, it is about being able to help people make decisions, but it's also about allowing people to collaborate and share their own thoughts. I mean, I think the first example that I shared where, the intern took a photo of some competitive thing and then posted that content in the platform, that's an example of a business user maybe creating their own story and sharing their own experience to everyone else in the business. So collaboration is about, it's not just about letting the insights team kind of work collaboratively on producing content. It's about bringing all the departments together in a business to allow them to collectively make a decision, all based on a central set of knowledge, but allowing those people to question what they're doing and interact with the content in a way that is maybe different to just that the sort of step 2 I saw in that curve where it was just about searching and finding content. That gets you partway there, but human nature is such that we want to question, we want to kind of get under the covers of the information we're being given, and write our own stories and explain our own kind of view on things. And so collaboration is very much about that, a space where people can share ideas, bring everything together.
Excellent, thank you. We have a question from Farhan, who's asking whether the MarketLogic tool can act as a research information aggregator from the internet. Does that make sense?
Absolutely does, yes. And I mean, yes is the answer to that. So, that body of knowledge that I talked about, the knowledge doubling curve at the beginning, obviously, not every piece of knowledge in the human domain is relevant to the industry that you work in, but there's lots of information out there which is. And so any business decision that's made is not just made based on your own primary research. It has to be made based on what's going on with your competitors, what's happening in the external marketplace, what what are people talking about, internet news, what are people saying about you on social media feeds. Voice of the customer is very important in the way that we think about going to market now. So a platform like this can really only function correctly if you act as an information aggregator. So you're blending that internal, primary research with maybe secondary syndicated research and, internet sources. And I think, that's critical, that you bring all those together into one place to give you that totally holistic view so that you can make the right decision based on, all knowledge that's relevant.
Wow, really fascinating, incredible where technology is taking us. Tim, thank you so much for your time and for putting this presentation together. I'm afraid that's it. We're out of time for today, but please continue to send your questions in, because Tim and his team will also be able to answer you, of course, in writing afterwards. So from our side, Tim, thank you so much for joining us today. And of course, thank you to everybody who participated in our webinar today. We really hope you enjoyed your time with us. If you're interested in what's coming up next at ESMA, then please go to our resources widget in the console and click on the link. We have a huge amount of content that's being discussed and broadcast, so don't miss out. Of course, if you'd like to join ESMA, then click on the link in the widget as well. Your support is invaluable to us. So all that's left to say is we look forward to seeing you in a future webinar, and thanks again.